Hello and welcome to episode 377 of the Money to the Masses podcast with your resident expert, as always, Damien Fay, and me, Andy Leeks. Damien, welcome back. How are you doing?
I'm nice and cool. That's the main thing that I am this week, Andy, because obviously we did have the hottest day on record in the UK this week. So it was quite difficult for everybody to get through that, although we were in the office for large parts of it with the aircon. And of course, it makes me think about the whole issue about global warming. And one of the things that was a real positive this week is that it marked 6 months since we started our climate impact project. So if you listened to the podcast 6 months ago, you would have known that we are now planting trees via Money to the Masses. And we've now got to 1,067 trees planted. And we do it via Ecology, which is a website that you can sign up to if you want to make a difference. And we'll put a link in the show notes of this episode, and you can go and look and see the projects that we've been supporting. And you can also sign up via that link, which means that you get to plant more trees when you open an account, and we get more trees planted under ours. So that's a real positive, and it's something that I'm proud of us doing. So that was a real buzz to see that we'd crossed that 6-month mark, and also we're now above the 1,000 tree level.
Yeah, and do have a look on there, because you can actually see the details behind that. So you can see, for example, that we have helped generate renewable solar electricity in Egypt. We're preventing deforestation in the Democratic Republic of Congo. And you can actually see what our 98.99 tons of carbon reduction actually equates to. For example, it's 76 long-haul flights, almost 300 meters squared of sea ice has been saved. And yeah, so it's interesting to look at, and it makes us feel good as we're doing our work and knowing that we're doing something impactful as well.
Yeah, and before we move on with what's on the podcast this week, Andy, I just want to ask again, don't forget to send in reviews that we can read out. So go to your podcast app of choice, leave a review, let us know, and who knows, it could be mug-worthy. So this week on the podcast, we are doing 3 pieces as usual. The first piece I'm going to do is about traveling abroad and what's the best way to take money abroad or spend money on holiday. It's something we've not done for 3 years, and things have changed quite a bit, and it's something we've been talking about in the office and people have been asking us, so I'm going to tell you the answer to that. I'm also going to do a quick piece on investing, which is talking about a summer portfolio, something I touched upon in a podcast a year ago, but I'm going to provide a little bit more insight and an update as to what has been happening with that summer portfolio over the last 18 months. And Andy, you're going to be doing a piece on
your rights in terms of compensation from water companies. There's been lots in the news about people losing their supply due to obviously extreme heat and dry conditions, but also because of burst pipes. So there are things you can do as customers to get some form of compensation, and I'll run you through the details on that. And actually, I'll quickly touch on other areas that you can get compensation as well, like your energy, so gas and electricity.
Okay, great. So I'm going to kick off with the best way to take your money abroad on holiday. Now, there is a link in the show notes to a whole article that we've done comparing the different options. So I'm going to run through them on the podcast. If you want to look at more detail, then do make sure you look at the link in the show notes or on the Money to the Masses website. You can go and find it via the show page for this particular episode 377 on the Money to the Masses website, or you can search for the best way to take money on holiday in the search bar in the top right-hand corner of the website. But to kick off, obviously, if you go on holiday, one of the things you can do is just take cash on holiday. So we're not going to dwell on cash, because even though that might feel like it's one of the simplest ways to take money on holiday, in fact, some places you travel, you can't actually take cash. If you go to Morocco at the moment, for example, we know this because Lauren went there recently, you're not allowed to take cash into the country or out of the country. So you wouldn't be able to change all your money up before you went away and then take it with you. So assuming you're not going to want to do that, for a lot of people like me, I wouldn't want to do that for security reasons. I much would rather take things in a more secure way, such as by using a card. Equally, traveller's checks are a bit old hat now, because traveller's checks aren't accepted universally. So we're going to completely park traveller's checks. That's something that is almost a blast from the past. So we're moving on to what other ways would you want to take money abroad? And this is something I've been looking at closely, because I will be going away this summer. So I'm going to be trying to make sure that I do it in the most cost-effective way. So you do have a number of options that you can use if you're going to go on holiday. Now, one of them is to use a credit card. So you could get a particular credit card that's very good for using abroad. You could use something like a prepaid travel card. but you could also use certain app-only banks that are very good when traveling abroad. I'm going to run through all of those. Now, typically, when you use a credit card abroad, you'll have a choice when you're using your card with a retailer to pay in the local currency or in your own currency. Now, if you say to the retailer you want to pay in pounds, then what will happen, there'll be something called a dynamic currency conversion occurs, where they convert the price of the item you're purchasing from the local currency into pounds. Now, the problem is there could be a markup of around about 4% on that. So the general rule of thumb is you always pay in the local currency. Now, what would happen on a normal credit card is that your credit card company then would convert that at an exchange rate, which would typically be something like the MasterCard rate or the Visa rate, and then they will apply a fee on top of that transaction. And that fee is usually a percentage, and it's somewhere between 2 to 3%. So what you can find is if you go on holiday and you spend money throughout your trip, then you will actually be paying 2 to 3% on top of everything, which soon starts to mount up. So if you spend the equivalent of about £1,000 if you're on holiday, then you're going to be spending £20 to £30 more than you need to. And that's because there are a number of credit cards that you can use abroad that don't charge transaction fees. And of course, if you use a credit card, then you get that consumer 75 protection as well when you're buying things. Now, I'm going to rattle through a couple of travel credit cards. Now, we do a roundup of these regularly each month because these do change. So the offers and the rates and the best cards do change. So if you listen to this podcast, do go and check the show notes of this article, because we'll put a link to the best travel card article that we update each month so you can see the latest deals there. But to give you an example, Barclaycard's reward credit card doesn't charge any fees. The standard interest rate is 23.9% on that card, and they don't charge for cash withdrawals at ATMs, but obviously there will be interest charged at 23.9% on any withdrawals that you make. So if you do use that card, you want to make sure you pay it off as soon as you're back from your holiday. But it always pays to check the T's and C's of your credit card to see how they apply interest, because you may still end up paying some interest on some of the spending and ATM withdrawals. Now, another card you could use is the Santander all-in-one credit card. This pops up on a lot of our Best Buy tables, whichever category that you're looking at, whether it's balance transfer, travel credit cards. It really is an all-in-one credit card. So that doesn't charge any fees for spending abroad. Now, there is a 3% charge on cash withdrawals, and the interest rate is more than the Barclaycard interest rate. So on the spending, it's 24.7%, and on cash withdrawals, it's 29.9%. And on that card, actually, you can earn 1% cash back on purchases abroad until the 18th of September 2022. There is a minimum spend of £500 that applies, and all purchases have to be made in a local currency. But you can see, theoretically, you can actually earn cash back on your holiday spending with that particular credit card. Now, I'm not going to run through any more. They are among the best choices out there. Now, the issue is that if you're going to go away on holiday and you think, right, what are the best ways to be able to spend my money abroad? You're only in this instance paying the exchange rate, and that exchange rate should be pretty good, but you are taking out effectively a credit agreement if you take out a new credit card. And if you are going to be thinking about borrowing money in the future, taking out a mortgage, you might not want to take out a new credit card. So for me, for example, I certainly wouldn't want to take out a new credit card just to go on holiday. So for me, the choice was not to take out a credit card when you're going abroad. So what else could you do? Well, one interesting option is something called Curve. I'll link to a review in the show notes of the podcast. But a Curve card works in a similar way to, say, the Apple Wallet that you have. So what the card does is that you use the Curve card, but your other cards in your wallet can be loaded upon it. So you use your Curve card abroad, but you are effectively spending on the credit card that you've associated with it, or the current account. And what's clever about it is that you can use your Curve card, but your credit card won't charge the fees for shopping abroad, because it's effectively a transaction with Curve. So it can cut down on all of those overseas fees on spending. Now, we have got a review, like I said, that goes into more details. The one issue with Curve is that there are limits when you withdraw currency from ATMs abroad. So that's £200 a month. Otherwise, there's a 2% fee thereafter and a 50p charge for over 10 cash withdrawals in a month. And there is a limit on the fee-free overseas spending of £1,000 every 30 days. And after that, there's a 2% fee for anything you spend beyond the £1,000. So it's a clever option. The one thing to point out, though, that you don't get the consumer protection on your credit card spending because you're spending on the Curve card, and it breaks that link directly with your credit card company under the consumer protection rules. So something to bear in mind. Now, if we move on to some of the more interesting options and some of the more widely used ones, which are incredibly good for spending abroad, Revolut is a prepaid card. So there are a number of prepaid cards out there. There's Caxton, which I've personally used in the past, but Revolut is probably the leader in this field when you look at what's on offer. Now, what's interesting about Revolut is technically not a UK bank. It doesn't have a banking license in the UK. It does have one in Europe, but what it means that any money held on it is not protected by the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. So just a reminder, that scheme will protect money held in a UK bank that is authorised up to £85,000 per person per banking institution if they were to go bust. So if your bank goes bust, you can get your money back up to £85,000 per single account, or if you've got a joint account, it can go up to £170,000 and you'll get that money within 7 days. Now, Revolut doesn't offer that protection because it doesn't have a UK banking license, but it does segregate your money into a customer account. So theoretically, the money in that account should be sufficient to pay back customers if something was to go wrong and they were to go bust. But it obviously does rely on the institution itself sticking to its obligations. But Revolut works best when you think of it as a prepaid card. So you will put money onto that card to spend while you're abroad. Now, the app is amazing. It works very quickly. You could be spending money in a shop while you're waiting to queue. You can top it up. It happens instantly. And it has access to around 30 currencies on that particular card. Now, what you can do, which makes Revolut interesting, is that you can put money on the card in pounds and then spend abroad, and then they will convert that as you spend on that day using the interbank exchange rate. Now, in simple terms, that interbank exchange rate has no fees on it, and it is the true rate that you see if you Google online for the exchange rate between two currencies. So in that regard, it is the cheapest way to spend money and the best rate you're probably going to get if you spend money while on holiday. But you can also load money onto a card in advance and convert it into the currency you want and store that currency on that card before you go on holiday. So for example, if you were going to go to America, you could therefore decide to convert money into dollars, leave it on the card in advance when you thought the exchange rate was good. So you can almost play the currency markets to maximize your holiday spending money for when you get there. Now, Revolut is free to use and to get a card. You will have to pay a charge to get the card delivered. But like everything in life, there are some drawbacks. Now, Revolut does have a £200 fee-free limit on its ATM withdrawals abroad a month, or 5 withdrawals a month. And after that, you pay a 2% fee. And for overseas spending, that limit is £1,000. And beyond that £1,000 spending, then you start getting charged a 0.5% fee. Now, there is a weird quirk with Revolut that on the weekends, they do add up to a 1% charge on the exchange rate that happens, so that interbank exchange rate that I talked about, because obviously banking occurs during the week. They put a charge on top to protect themselves on currency moves. So it's not so good to use on a weekend, oddly enough, when you're abroad. So the message becomes that the longer you are away with Revolut, then the more charges you are likely to incur, because you'll probably make more ATM withdrawals. You'll probably spend more on a weekend. But that is nitpicking, if I'm being honest. So Revolut is still one of the most popular options and something I've used in the past, and something which I think is a great option for a lot of people because it doesn't require you taking out a bank or credit card. There is no credit check on you, obviously, when you take it out, and it's very quick to set up. Now, they do have plans, which means that if you pay a monthly fee, you get more benefits, and some of those limits that I mentioned are reduced. So for a lot of people who are just listening to this podcast and they're thinking, look, I want to take money away, the cheapest way can I do it without too much fuss, then a free Revolut account. So the standard plan is probably going to be very attractive for them. Now, in the modern world, we've got some really interesting app-only banks. And the one I'm going to focus on for this part of the podcast is Starling Bank. So Starling, one of the new app-only banks, actually is amazing for spending overseas. They don't charge any overseas fee. They use the MasterCard exchange rate when they're converting the currency. And they don't charge fees on ATMs use either. But interestingly, there are no limits. So where the others that I mentioned before might apply limits to the free use of their cards abroad, beyond those limits, they start to put charges. Starling doesn't do that. And it's in a current account as well. So you can get a bank account in the UK, the Starling account. If you've already got one, great, you can spend money abroad. What happens, you use your money, it converts like normal at the point you spend, but that rate will be a good rate, but you won't be charged any extra fees. And that rate is not different at the weekends, unlike Revolut. Now, one of the things that's confusing is it comes down to, how does the Revolut exchange rate compared to the one used by Starling? Because like I said, Revolut used the interbank exchange rate and Starling used the MasterCard rate. Now, when we looked at the analysis, and I mean, it changes a lot, so it's hard to pin down. There isn't much difference between the two. Some sources online make out there is a difference, that the MasterCard one is slightly higher than the interbank rate. But when we've looked at it and done some numbers, there are times where the MasterCard rate will actually give you more currency than the interbank one that's being used by Revolut. It depends on what's going on at that particular time, what the exchange rates are when you make your purchase. So I'd argue there's not much to choose between. If there is, it's normally only about 0.3% or something like that. So Starling is a very good option. Now, when you take out a bank account with Starling, you don't get an overdraft by default, which means you don't have a hard credit search when you take it out. You get a soft search on your credit file, which means that other lenders and institutions can't see it when they look at your credit report, and it doesn't impact your credit score. So it's a very attractive option. So when I'm looking at all these options out there, I like Revolut. I think it's a very good one, easy, prepaid. Whereas if you want something a bit more that you can use in the UK when you come back, a current account that's award winning, then Starling ticks all those boxes as well and doesn't have any limits spending overseas. They're both very good options. The issue you have with Revolut when you come back to the UK is that you are charged if you want to start using it as a means to withdraw money out of an ATM in the UK. There are certain limits that apply. So it's not so great in the UK. One thing I will say about Revolut on an aside is that you get a free children's card. So it works like a separate account almost that you can put money on for pocket money, a bit like GoHenry that we've talked about in the past. That is free. You get one free per Revolut account, and it enables children to go spending in the UK or abroad, which is fantastic. So I really like that. Whereas on Starling, they offer a similar feature, but you do have to pay a monthly fee for that one. So Revolut and Starling are big ticks if you don't want to take out a credit card of any kind. And obviously, I have to mention Monzo. So Monzo works pretty much in the same way as Starling in the regard to spending overseas, but there are limits on their HM usage that is free. So that's £250 free every 30 days within the EEA, so the European Economic Area, or £200 fee free every 30 days outside of that. And then again, there's charges of 3% thereafter. So Monzo is very much like Starling. And again, it's another free option. So the good news is there's so many great ways that you can avoid paying fees if you go abroad. Make sure that you look at all the various options and you don't just go with your default current account or credit card. One other feather I might stick in the cap of Revolut is that some people might like it because you can use it as a prepaid card and it's not associated with your own account and spending at home. So if fraud is committed on it, there's going to be very limited to what they can take. Yes, you could use a Starling account like that if it's not your main bank account as well, but I do think that's quite a nice idea.
I must admit, Damien, I've got a Starling bank account and I use that abroad and I found it fantastic. One thing that I'm questioning, because I'm not sure how Revolut works, but with regards to accessing the stuff on your bank account through your phone and stuff, you'll need to be careful where you're going and that you've got access, right?
Yeah, so there can be an issue, and this isn't down to just Revolut. This is just if you go to perhaps a nice restaurant and you go in and you haven't loaded the card up beforehand because you wanted to see how much the bill was going to be, because some people will only load up what they want on a card for that period of time, perhaps because it isn't a fully authorized entity in the UK. And of course, if you went into a restaurant that's in a basement and you don't get a phone signal, then you can't transfer the money across. You're going to have to go and find a phone signal to do it if you don't do it in advance. Obviously, you could move money in advance. If you've got a Starling account and it's just an account you use and you put all the money in and you're happy to do that, then of course the money's there when you go downstairs. But like I say, you could do that with Revolut if you wanted to. The other thing to mention about Starling, which is a feather in its cap, is that you can have have a joint account with Starling. You can't have a joint account technically with Revolut. You can have more than one card, but they're supposed to be used by the individual whose name's on the Revolut account. But with Starling, you can officially have a joint account which you could use abroad. It just requires both people to open up Starling accounts. And obviously, if you're going to have a joint account, you want to make sure you do that with somebody who you want to be financially connected with. You don't want to be going on holiday and just doing it with a friend, for example, because that can impact your credit rating. And while I can't list every option that's out there, because I know there'll be people who are writing about particular options, one other bank you could look at is Chase, which is a relatively new entrant in the UK. They offer fee-free spending abroad as well, but they do have limits on their ATM usage. And they also do offer cashback, interestingly, for the first 12 months. So it's another option, but a bank account this time that can give you cashback while on holiday. So plenty of options there. And there's no excuse why you should be paying any more fees than necessary when you go on holiday.
And as Damien said, that article is going to be in the show notes. And if you've got a holiday earmarked for the future, bookmark that article because it's updated regularly. Okay, so let's move on to the next piece then. And I'm going to be covering the compensation you may be entitled to if you've experienced some problems with your water supply.
And I can't stop you there, Andy. For listeners, this is very close to Andy's heart this week because, Andrew, have you experienced problems with your water this week?
Well, funny you should say that. Yes, I have. Obviously, we had the hot weather and we had a burst water main, and I live in a small village. And so, of course, that was one of the main pipes into the village, and it caused absolute bedlam.
Yeah, so Andy had no water for quite a long time on the hottest day on record, and nobody in his village did, and they sold out of bottled water in the local shop. So it was difficult for everyone, but it's very difficult if you don't have any water.
Yeah, and so this piece really is to just quickly go through some of the things that you can get compensation for. We're going to focus really on water, but this does apply to other areas of your supply. So it does apply to energy, so gas and electricity, and we'll touch on that briefly later.
And that is obviously interesting because with the energy crisis that we've also got, there has been rumour, speculation that we could have periods of blackout in the winter months. So it's something to bear in mind for later in the year.
Yeah, and so a lot of this information that I'm going to be giving you is available on the Citizens Advice website, and this is where I've drawn a lot of this information from, and we'll put a link to that article in the show notes. So all water companies must follow a guaranteed standard scheme which is set out by Ofwat, the regulator for water. Now, if a company doesn't meet these standards, you may be able to claim compensation. And there are 4 things that water companies must adhere to under the guaranteed standard scheme. And I'm going to go through each one of them. So the first main one is that they have to deal with interruptions to the water supply. They must also make and keep appointments. That's number 2. Number 3 is they must maintain the right water pressure in your property. And number 4 is they must answer any account queries and complaints. Now, all 4 of those different reasons, you can actually get compensation. So let's deal with the main one first of all. So emergency interruptions to your water supply. So if your water supply is interrupted by an emergency, such as a burst water pipe, the company must restore the supply within 12 hours of becoming aware of the problem. The only difference to that is if it's a strategic main pipe. Now, you possibly won't know if it is, but you will be advised if it is or not. They must restore that supply within 48 hours. Now, the water company must take reasonable steps to advise you of what's happening, and that means they must tell you where you can get an alternative water supply if possible. They must tell you when they plan to restore the supply by, and they also must give you a telephone number where you can get further information. Here comes the bit about compensation. So if your water supply isn't restored in the time set out, you are usually entitled to compensation of £20 for the first 24 hours and £10 for each further 24-hour period that the supply remains unrestored. And then further to that, you can actually add on extra compensation. So if you don't receive the payment within 20 working days, you're entitled to another £20 payment. So this is compensation on top of compensation.
So do you have to claim it or do you get it automatically?
So it depends what you're claiming for. We're going to go through all the different types of compensation claims. Some are paid automatically, but some you'll have to claim. So it depends on the claim.
So I've got to wait, is what you're telling me.
You've got to wait.
I've jumped the gun a bit too early.
You've got to wait for the good stuff. So we've gone through emergency supply issues. Strangely, you can actually get compensation for missed appointments. So if you've got an appointment with the water board, if they need to come around to check on something, or if maybe you're building an extension and you need a consultation, If they don't keep to the time slot agreed, then they must pay £20 within 10 working days. And again, there's compensation on compensation. If they don't pay that within the correct time frame, you're entitled to an additional £10. The next one is low water pressure. Now, I like this one because we've all moaned about our water pressure at some point in our lives, I'm sure. And obviously, as stocks deplete, you will possibly experience low water pressure. So be mindful of this, especially in periods of hot weather that we're having at the moment. So water companies are required to supply water at a certain pressure. There's a technical term for it. It means it must be maintained at a minimum 7 meters per static head. Don't get too involved with that. The issue is, if you feel like your water pressure has dropped, you can measure it and then you can apply for compensation. So in terms of testing your water pressure, it's not that easy. You'll either need to get a water pressure meter. You can get one from Screwfix. It's about £20. Or you could do a very broad measure. It's a quick test. Put a jug in your sink and you put the water on full. And if you can fill a litre of water in 6 seconds or less, that's generally considered fine. If it takes longer than 6 seconds, then you may have a potential claim for low water pressure. That's a sort of broad guide.
So we're going to have a load of people, I'm just visualising listeners getting a jug and doing a low pressure water test, and their partner saying, "What are you doing?" And I'm testing the water pressure. Who knew that's what we'd be doing this weekend?
And if you do that, use that water for good.
Film it.
Yeah. Put it out in the garden or something like that. And so here's the compensation information. If the pressure falls below the minimum standard for an hour or more on at least 2 occasions in a 28-day period, you are entitled to a payment or credit of £25, and only one payment of £25 can be made in any one financial year. And this comes back to your question earlier, Damien. This type of compensation for low water pressure, this is paid automatically. And the final area that you may be able to claim compensation for issues with your water supply is if you write to your water company about a query and then they don't reply or respond. So the company must respond within 10 working days. If the company fails to meet the deadlines, you are entitled to compensation of £20. And again, this payment should be paid automatically. If you're not paid automatically within 10 working days, you can claim an additional £10 payment within the next 3 months. So just to go over again how compensation is paid, some compensation is paid automatically, as we've covered, either as a payment to you or as money credited to your water account. And in other cases, you may have to make a claim to the water company in writing within 3 months of the incident. I know, for example, when we had the bad weather and we had a storm, the energy company contacted us to let us know that we were eligible to claim, but we then had to fill in a claim form in order to claim. It's likely that it will be a similar situation with water because there are so many customers affected in a broad area. You'll likely be contacted and have to make a claim. If in doubt, go onto your local water supplier's website and they'll have details on how to claim on these things. Finally, if you are a business customer, it's likely that you'll be paid compensation at a higher rate than the amounts that we've discussed in this piece. Again, go onto your supplier's website and the details are there. And so as a customer, you're entitled to compensation almost in exactly the same way with your water as you are with your energy. So think gas, think electricity. I won't go through the numbers, it'll make the piece too long. But to give you an idea, you'll get around £70 if your power has been off for 24 hours through bad weather. And if it's a severe storm, you'll get £70 if the power was off for 48 hours. The reason you get the same amount but you have to wait longer is there's going to be obviously lots more people affected, so it will take them longer to fix the issues, which means they need a slightly longer period. It's strange how they work the numbers, but it kind of makes sense. And if the power cut wasn't caused by bad weather, how much you get will depend on how many homes are affected. If fewer than 5,000 homes are affected, you'll get £75 if your power is off for 12 hours, and you'll get £35 for every 12 hours after that. If it's more than 5,000 homes are affected, you'll get £75 if the power is off for longer than 24 hours rather than 12, and you'll get £35 for every 12 hours after that. And there is a maximum claim of £300. So there's an example of some claims that you can make for energy. We'll probably cover that later on in the year in more detail if people are interested. And as an additional note, and kind of throwing back to what Damien said about potential blackouts, you can get an extra £75 if your power goes off more than 4 times in one financial year for more than 3 hours each time. So keep a note if it happens. So that was electricity. Let's quickly touch on gas. There is a £40 compensation that will be paid if your supplier doesn't give you at least 7 working days notice of any interruptions to your supply. So let's say there's going to be some work going on and you're going to lose your supply apply £40 compensation there. If it's an unplanned gas cut, you might be entitled to compensation if you lose access for more than 24 hours. So you'll get £60 after the first 24 hours, another £60 for each 24-hour period. There are some caveats to that. You can't get compensation with your gas if more than 30,000 homes were affected, or if you caused the gas supply to be cut off. So if any budding sort of DIYers, just be careful. And also if your gas network operator took reasonable steps to prevent a power cut during bad weather. That seems a little bit of a grey area, a little bit of a one they put in there to stop paying out.
But then also what would be interesting to see how all of that, because I think it's a very good piece, how that will stack up in the winter months if there is some form of rationing on use of gas or electricity, and how it stacks up with that compensation. Good. So moving on to the last piece then, Andy. This is a piece I want to do on investing. Now, last year I did a piece on the summer portfolio. So if you go back to podcast episode 323, I introduced this concept, and to give you a quick recap, I carried out some research for 80/20 investor members in which I looked at the whole sell in May and go away adage. So for those who don't know, the saying goes, selling May and go away, don't come back till St. Leger's Day. Now, St. Leger's is a horse race that is run in September. The idea being that you would sell out of equity markets during the summer months and then reinvest once again in the autumn. And in doing so, you avoid what has typically been a more volatile period of the year. Now, some of the reasons behind why this could be a phenomenon is because you had lots of people in days gone by leaving the city, going to watch polo or whatever it is they were doing during the summer months. And so trading volumes were lighter. And when trading volumes are lighter, then any movements that you get, large buys or sales, have an oversized impact on equity markets, and so you get this increase in volatility. You still see increased volatility and lighter trading volumes during the summer month, but when you look at the analysis, it's debatable whether it's actually that reliable an investment strategy anymore. In fact, if you look at the last 5 or 6 years, well, the only time since 2016 that it's actually worked is in 2019, and it failed spectacularly in the pandemic year of 2020 because markets rebounded as central banks started pumping in liquidity into investment markets. So it didn't even work last year. But in the 80/20 piece of research that I created last summer, it was ahead of last summer, in fact, I thought, could it be tweaked? Could it be tailored? Could, instead of going and sitting in cash, so moving out of equity markets, say, let's use a proxy of the FTSE 100 and going into cash over the summer months, could you go into more defensive assets? So could you remain invested during the summer months, then going back into something like the FTSE 100? Could that turbocharge your investment returns? And the answer was, yes, it could. And so I mentioned last year about the impact if you started to invest over the long term using that strategy. I've updated the numbers, and actually, if you bought and held the FTSE 100 since September 1992 until the 1st of May this year, so I've included last summer's market movements in this analysis now, the annualized return was 7.21%. If you use a sell in May strategy where you moved into cash, it was 7.2%, so you were slightly worse off. If you used a defensive strategy, you could have got 9.11% annualized return. So using real numbers, invest £1,000 back in September 92. If you'd used a buy and hold strategy, then you'd have £8,784. The sell in May strategy going into cash, you'd have £8,114. But if you'd moved into defensive assets, then you would have had £14,417 now. So there's a significant difference. Now, I didn't mention what the asset classes were because I looked at all the different unit trust sectors that existed out there, looked at how they performed during the summer months and the winter months, and was there a difference? And there was a difference. In fact, certain assets do perform better, it seems, during the summer months than winter months. Now, I'm going to give you some insight this time around, a bit more than I did last year as a teaser. UK gilts are one of those asset classes. And actually, if you look at the last 15 years, the odds of a slump in UK gilts during the winter months is 40%. So there's a 40% chance that markets are going to fall during the winter months, but there's only a 13.33%. So 13.33% chance of UK gilt funds on average falling during the summer months. That's a stark difference. So if you built that into your strategy and had exposure to that asset class during the summer months rather than UK equities, for example, then you would have achieve the performance that I mentioned. And actually, just to reiterate on those numbers for the buy and hold strategy, I used a proxy of investing in the average UK equity fund, not the FTSE 100. So that just tells you where those numbers came from. So the message of this part of the podcast, the summer months, you can seemingly, based on history and long term, move into more defensive assets. Now, there are other sectors, which I won't give away. If you want to see it, you can sign up to 80/20 Investor for a free trial. There is a research piece. There are other sectors out there that do work defensively quite well during the summer months, which you could experiment with as well. What is interesting that I noticed this time around is that during the summer months, UK equities, as expressed by the UK All Companies sector average, have a 40% chance of underperforming or losing value in the summer months versus 33.3% in the winter months. And that's based on the last 15 years. But with US equities, it's pretty much split even. The chances are 26.67% for both periods. So the message is that based on the last 15 years, you would have been better off investing in US equities rather than UK equities during the summer months. Whether that phenomenon continues will be interesting. So to finish off this piece of the podcast, what happened when you applied this concept of a summer portfolio in the real world rather than just theoretical in 2021 and so far in 2022, which has been a bit of a tough year for investing. In fact, one of the toughest on record. Now, in 2021, the summer portfolio was up 3.14% and actually was outperforming a portfolio that remained invested in UK equities right the way up until mid-August of 2021, at which point UK equities got a nice leg up and they finished 6.63% up on average. So it did underperform a buy and hold strategy where you just stayed invested in equity markets last year, but the underperformance wasn't that marked. Whereas this year, it'll be interesting to see where we end up, because at the moment, bond and equities have had a torrid year no matter what. Bond and equity markets globally, irrespective of which markets you picked, have hit bear markets. At the moment, the sell in May, if you'd gone into cash, well, you'd be flat at the moment. If you'd stayed invested in UK equities, despite them being one of the better performing markets year to date, since the beginning of May 2022 until mid-July, we are down 7%. Whereas if you got into defensive assets, in this case, I was talking about UK gilts, then you'd be down 4.9%. So you're still down, but not as much. It'll be interesting to see what happens for the remainder of the summer, whether that idea of going defensive will still ring true based on long-term performance. So there you go, an update on the summer portfolio and some interesting ideas for people to go away and look at themselves.
Okay, so that's it. We're done for this week. If you want to get in touch with Damien, you can do so in the usual way. It's Damien at moneytothemasses.com. Twitter, it's at moneytothemasses with number 2. We're on Instagram, TikTok, and all the usual places. Do make sure you join the Money to the Masses community group if you want to get involved at all, ask any questions. A lot of like-minded people in there, and they're very friendly and happy to answer any questions. And so that's it. We're done for this week, Damien. Until next time.
Until next time.